The Construction Record is brought to you by the BC Construction Safety Alliance. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record podcast. I'm Warren Frey, digital media editor for the Journal of Commerce and the Daily Commercial News, and with me is...
Well, I'm Russell Hixson, staff writer for the Journal of Commerce.
And I'm Vince Versace, national managing editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, coming straight to you from Toronto.
Yep, and straight from home. As usual, we're recording from our separate bunkers, but despite that, the news goes on. Vince, what's happening in Ontario?
Well, we got quite a bit of stuff. I think we've seen this rhythm, and we talk about it almost every podcast about how the industry is adjusting to the pandemic and the new business as usual that everybody's struggling with and for, and for to achieve and with to work within. And same thing with Ontario. We've had a lot of webinars where we've been covering stuff about pinch points around human resource pinch points in trying to operate with pandemic guidelines. Also, just to stay on top of some of the regulatory changes that are coming down the pike. As far as construction rolling out right now. Then we just got some of our usual kind of debates and stories around things around apprenticeships and skills training. I'm being vague because in a weird way, it was almost the first normal week. Guys, this week is the sense that I got looking at some of the content out here was like, it almost felt like the first normal week of stories since March 14th, really, since we started working from home. But the biggest thing I would say, it's not just an Eastern thing, is for both our publications, our National Women in Construction feature is coming out this Friday. So it's been great. Once again, this is now the 6th year we have this feature going nationally. It's been 4 years out of the 6, so meaning that it's run in both publications. I'm always still amazed at the stories that we come across, and kind of these innovators in this space that are just trying to attract, women to the industry. And you've heard that, and two kind of topical things that kind of tied in a little bit to the pandemic is we had one story in the Women in Construction feature that's about the she session. You've heard this term mentioned, how this recent recession under the pandemic has disproportionately affected women in employment more than men. So we kind of took a different angle to see, does this present any type of opportunity for more doors to open for women to enter the construction industry? What are our stakeholders thinking? So we had a couple of different Western stakeholders talking about that. We thought that was pretty interesting. And one of the other stories that we had was a recent StatsCan labor force report that indicated for the first time in 5 years there was a dip in the amount of women working in construction. So it had been increasing steadily since 2015, 2016. And then over this last reporting year, it dipped by 4,300 workers. There were 4,300 less females working in construction than before.
Pre-COVID? Like that's
yeah.
When the dip happened?
Yep, pre-COVID,
Weird.
right? So it was kind of interesting because though that dip happened on the women's side, the actual overall workforce still increased. So we took a closer look with Ian Harvey, our freelance writer, kind of diving in a little bit into both that StatsCan labor force report and also talking to some of the people that you guys have talked to, that we've talked to, that have been involved in trying to attract more women to the trades, to see, are there, I'm going to use this term again already, pinch points that we're now realizing now a couple years into trying to attract women to construction. What is it? And so Ian actually did a 2-part story, one looking at the numbers and what the women mobilized in the industry, women groups and advocacy groups that are mobilized, what they're saying and seeing. And also, we still looked at a secondary piece, which was what's actually still been working. The outreach programs, the support programs. Some of these groups are getting more data, better data, to understand why women leave the industry or why they stay. It's just stuff that we've taken for granted for years in this industry, right? Men fill spaces. They come in, they go out. If they leave, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But you guys have written these stories too about the appeal to underrepresented groups, and it's not just women. Like, how do you reach out to them and get them engaged in our industry and stay, right? So, Russ, anything to add to that? I know you've done some stories along that line before.
Yeah, I mean, we have an industry that is always saying, if you want to work, if you have skills, we want you. They're so desperate for labor, and we have to figure out why are women not wanting to work in construction, I think is a really big question. Is it that they're uncomfortable on job sites? Is it that, I don't know what it is. But I mean, I think whenever I read a story about, creating more opportunities for women in construction, I think that's awesome. I think that's great. But I always think in the back of my head, well, how great is that if, there's women who, even with all these opportunities, don't want to work in construction in the first place. So I don't know. I don't know how to address that, right? We probably need some better data on that and figure out why is it that women just don't want to work. And like that dip is really concerning because I know in BC, like we've been trying very, very hard. There's a lot of things that they're trying to do. And to see that dip, I'm sure is very, very discouraging.
And one thing I've heard is that you can get them into the industry, but then there's a lot of people, well, women specifically, who leave the industry after being in it for a while, and a lot of that is culturally related. Like it's just not a welcoming workplace for them, and so why should they stick around?
I'm sure all of us have interviewed women who are tradespeople who have worked in the industry, and they say it's hard. It's hard to be on a job site in some of these workplace cultures, and it's not pleasant for women.
And this is 2020, not 1975. So it's.
And that was the interesting thing because we did take that look at that secondary story, looking at what has been working. And anecdotally, and some of the stuff that we've heard from some women that say that, well, this program, the support program works. It's not even that, like the one that was being described was the first Wednesday of every month is a meeting where all the women from the different sites come in or the chapter come in. They bring their kids if they want or whatnot, and they just talk about what they're facing, right? And sometimes, like, that's all it takes is just a conversation. You know what I mean? It's like, look, I'm running into, like, one of the examples was, there was an apprentice, a female apprentice, and she's like, this guy's asking me to do all these things. And one of the senior women that's been around was like, that's actually an apprentice thing. It's not a female thing. It's an apprentice. This is what they do to apprentices. It's like the rookie on the team, clean out my truck, simple things like that. So sometimes it's a bit of that communication, but it's funny you mentioned it because when we talked to the BC stakeholders in a couple of those stories, some really good feedback about it. Because we know I can categorically say when I look at the women's groups that we've covered through these different features over the years, I've always been amazed at what's happening out west, in particular in BC and Alberta, around women's groups.
They're trying so hard.
Built. Yeah, their advocacy is strong, good vision, a good clear mandate. It's not just about, and I don't mean to demean this, but it's not just about the networking. You know what I mean? It's about, how do I carve my way to a viable career in this industry, So interesting stories. I hope people want to take some time to look at them. It was once in a while still eye-opening stuff, and one of the stories in diving into that national story, we talked to someone in Newfoundland where they have like this incredible, there's like this 13% participation of women in the skilled trades in that province.
It's amazing.
And it's amazing because they built a program over the last decade, which was basically geo based. It's like, okay, what is the trade that's missing in this part of the province? And if you're a woman interested in construction, well, there's no point in you studying to be a sheet metal worker if it's a carpenter that's needed there. And then they built the supports around that. You know what I mean? Well, there's this type of daycare providing this
very
type
targeted.
Of,
yeah.
Very targeted, and I don't mean to make our whole podcast about this topic, but I sometimes think maybe we should just do a whole topic dedicated to this because we write about it so often, even beyond the features, right? So I would say that's the biggest thing. So hopefully our readers and listeners take the time to go to dcnonl.com or joconl.com, and they can find those features. And hey, and we're always open to story ideas or feedback on these pieces. Are we missing something? You know what I mean? We'd love to know if we've gotten something wrong, or if we're on the right track and we need to go a little deeper. So
I've got something that we've written about before, specifically I have, but it's come back with a vengeance, and that's the opioid crisis, which affects trades more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. I recently attended a webinar by the BC Construction Safety Alliance, and they had Vicki Waldron, who's from Construction Industry Rehab. And what they do is they offer rehab services and sort of resources for people who are stuck with an addiction. But anyway, Vicki Waldron was talking about how all the usual reasons for the opioid crisis in trades, like, you know, that it's an injury-prone industry, and we have this culture of you need to get back to work quickly, or we'll find somebody else. Coupled with the fact that we can't find anybody, so the ones that are skilled they need right away. That's all a problem. But the thing she mentions, which I will cut to her actually saying in a bit here, is that COVID is what caused this latest. We had I think 170 deaths in May, which is a record, and it's more deaths than we've had from COVID, from the opioid crisis. And part of that was due to an extremely contaminated supply of fentanyl in the drugs, and that was all over the world. But part of it was also that with COVID happening, what you do with COVID is everybody self-isolates, and you have to hide away from the world. And that's the exact opposite of what you should be doing if you're treating somebody with an opioid problem. You should be, if you're going to use together, because that way that one person can watch that you're not going to overdose, and then make sure that the buddy system essentially for opioid use. And so COVID wipes that out. So you're at kind of loggerheads here. So if you're somebody who's got an opioid problem and COVID happens, you're stuck at home by yourself, and that's the worst place you can be. Anyway, she put it a lot better than I did, so we'll go to that clip right now.
One of the main harm reduction strategies we use with people that are using opioids within the opioid epidemic, one of the main things that guidance we give to people is do not use alone, right? We tell people not to use alone. And the reason we do that is that so we know with the opioid epidemic, the reason that we have an opioid epidemic primarily is because of a contamination in drug supply. So over the last 20, 30 years, historically, you'll find that the number of overdoses have not increased, despite what you might hear in the news and the media. Overdoses have never really increased. They've always pretty much stayed at the same level, and this has been for decades. It's always been that way. And then suddenly in 2012 we started to see this really sharp rise, and we didn't really know why. And then what we figured out was that it was a contamination. The drug supply that was coming in across the world, not just in British Columbia, is contaminated. So it's contaminated with fentanyl. And so when it's contaminated, what that means is the people that are using don't actually know, A, how much is in there, and B, what's in there, right? So the guidance we would give is, if you choose to use in pairs. When you use in pairs, one person would use, the other person would watch over that person, make sure that they're overweight 1 to 2 minutes. If they're okay, then they would go ahead and use, and then the other person would watch them. Now, COVID hit, and the advice that we give with COVID is the complete opposite of what we give for staying safe with the opioid epidemic, and that is isolate, do not go near other people, stay home, do not go out. So we've got this contradictory advice given out to people that are using, and so of course the number of deaths increased significantly.
And yeah, that was the big thing I covered. And Russ, what about you? You're working on a few things.
Yeah. I'm working on something about Hogan's Alley. Anybody who lives in Vancouver or the metro kind of Vancouver area probably has been reading a lot about it. I first heard about this when I wrote about the viaducts, I think a few years ago. And I think that the angle that I took back then was just very kind of sanitary and cold, and because I talked about the highway movement or the freeway movement. Mm-hmm. And because they're tearing down the viaducts now. And they were these elevated kind of platforms for the freeway system that were built in the 1970s. And they're just terrible. They don't move traffic through the city well at all.
They cut off whole parts of a neighborhood.
Yeah. And when they were built, they kind of destroyed this historically black neighborhood in Vancouver called Hogan's Alley. And now that the viaducts are coming down, there's been several groups that are really pressuring the city and staging several large protests, asking that the part of the plans for the area be to revitalize that neighborhood. And so I really am hoping to do a piece about, because when I first wrote about the viaducts, I just wrote about kind of development and the freeway system and like moving traffic in and out of a city and how it's not efficient. And I think that there's a cultural element of that I missed, where when you're doing urban planning, it's not just about being efficient and moving stuff through. You also have to take into account the cultural impacts and how people's lives are going to be impacted when you build something or when you take something away. It's not just about kind of the pragmatism, right? And so I think that's kind of an interesting theme that I'd like to explore with how development and urban planning can just really alter the fabric of a neighborhood in some really positive or really negative ways. So hopefully, that comes to fruition soon. I'm working on getting some interviews for that.
In the meantime, you interviewed Jesse Unke of the BC Construction Roundtable. So could you give a preamble of what you talked about? Although we do have an interview as well.
Yeah, Jesse Unke, he's the president of the Roundtable, and I had a great chat with him just about the work that the Roundtable's doing. And their whole deal is there's a lot of really, really, how do I put this? There's a lot of strong opinions in the construction industry, and the Roundtable is more interested in providing just kind of a very neutral area for people to discuss issues, and they're not really into advocacy per se. And I think that's really interesting, and they're just doing a lot of work with some of the groups that are advocating for the industry with government in terms of the COVID-19 recovery. And they even just released a report about kind of their idea of how the infrastructure building should be thought about as the province moves forward. They call it their point of view on infrastructure, and that's linked in a story that we're going to have up on our website. But I believe he mentions it in our chat as well. So I had a good chat with him.
Cool. And with no further ado, unless Vince, you got more to tell us from Ontario.
No, I'm good. I think we covered it all. I really hope just for our listeners, if anybody can speak with authority to the history of Hogan's Alley, and wants to reach out to us, I would recommend trying to reach out to Russ, or Russ, you can give your email. One of the other emails we have is editor@journalofcommerce.com. Yep. We're looking for somebody. We don't need a political view. Just walk us through the history as you know it, or that you can speak to the history of Hogan's Alley. I think that's something that's really I love the fact that you're re-looking at what you've done on those stories, because as a B2B, we're guilty of this too, but we have to. It's part of our survival too. We look at the construction side of things, how things are built. We don't, in our other lives and other publications we worked at, yes, we would look at things a bit more nuanced because it was part of the game. But here, let's take that moment to kind of look at it again. And I'm impressed that you're tackling it, Russ. So,
All right, without any further ado, let's go to that interview with Jesse.
This feature interview is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association, Ontario's champion for sustainable and safe water and sewer infrastructure.
All right, welcome to the podcast. I have Jesse Unke here. He's president of the BC Construction Roundtable. And welcome, Jesse.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about the Roundtable for those who don't know and the work that it does?
Yeah, you bet. So the British Columbia Construction Roundtable has been around for over 20 years. And really what our focus is in that group, we're a nonprofit group, and it's about having a true roundtable for the construction industry. So our members encompass contractors, consultants, suppliers, owners, legal professionals, insurance professionals, so on and so forth. So there's other groups out there that solely represent contractors or solely represent a certain group like consultants, but we really try to have a true roundtable perspective on the way that we look at things and look at issues. And traditionally what we would do if we weren't in the COVID situation is we have monthly breakfast sessions where we'll have someone come in or a panel of people come in and talk about a certain issue or item in the construction industry that affects all of these different groups. And that could be everything from, like, we just recently had the TransLink and the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority come in and talk about some of their upcoming projects, how COVID affected them and kind of what their plans are. And then we've also had other people come in and talk about issues around construction law or insurance or new products that are out there or new ways of building that are out there. And so we're really here to support innovation and really get the word out there on what's going on in the construction industry, but not take a one-sided stance on things either. We like to put things forward, and if possible, we like to have a panel type situation where we can have both sides, and then hear as well from an industry professional, maybe a consulting professional, and an owner as well, and tying that all together.
That kind of leads me into one of the questions that I have is, what are you hearing from people in the industry? What are some of the issues that are on their mind, some of the programming that they want? What are people wanting to talk about right now? Because there's a lot going on.
Definitely. And I think, what we've seen with a past couple of sessions that we've had with the British Columbia Construction Roundtable have been webinar-based events. Of course, we can't meet in person right now. So we've had a couple of webinars that we've used Zoom for, which has been quite successful. We had over 150 people attend our last event, which was last week for the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and them talking about their infrastructure projects and what's coming up, what's coming down the pipe for them. So I really think people are excited to hear about what projects are moving forward. And I think it's encouraging for our industry to hear that projects are moving forward and not everything isn't coming to a standstill. And I think we're really fortunate in the construction industry that we've been deemed an essential service, and that projects are still moving forward, and that work is still available out there and coming up as well. I mean, we have seen some pauses in some areas, but I think, as we're moving into trying to get back into the next normal or the new normal, that we're starting to see more and more clients and owners putting more projects out there. So I'd say the first thing would be that people are wanting to hear, okay, what's actually going on? How is this affecting the construction industry and projects that are upcoming? And I'd say the other thing, which is a huge thing in our industry, is the safety side of it. So this is great. There's all these projects coming down the pipe and all this other work that's coming out. But how are we going to do this successfully, and how are we going to execute it safely to ensure safety not only for the people on the ground doing the work and people involved, but also the general public as well, and ensuring that people are staying safe. So we try to weave that into our sessions as well, looking at what the opportunities are and how we're actually going to carry it out and how we can do it safely.
Yeah, that leads me into my next question is, I remember, a few months ago, we had this initial shock where everything just seemed to change overnight, just instantly. And everyone was kind of scrambling. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? How are we going to build the infrastructure and the buildings and the roads and whatnot that we need? And now we're kind of, it feels like we're at a different place because, like you said, projects are moving forward. Things are getting built. Where are we at in kind of this arc of COVID, this kind of new normal? And is there going to be a back to normal moment?
Yeah, that's a good point, because I don't think we'll ever know, or I don't think there ever will be a moment where we say, okay, everything's back to normal, because nothing will ever go back to how it was before.
Right.
And that's just the reality of what's going on right now. So I don't think there's going to be a moment where we say, okay, everything's back to normal, but I think we're all trying to adapt to, like I talked about, doing things safely and adapting to what the new normal is and what the next normal is in terms of how projects are delivered, how construction is completed, and everything that ties into that. So I think it's just an evolution. And I think there may be a point where, especially once a vaccine is in place and we get to that stage, I could see that being kind of maybe the next normal. But until we get there, we're definitely evolving in the way that we're looking at how to execute projects, especially from a safety standpoint, and being able to do things, still keep things on schedule and on budget, but being able to do things safely as well and incorporate that into the project.
Right. What do you think are going to be some of the legacies of COVID-19 as we go forward? Things that, maybe we probably won't change, even if there is a vaccine or a very effective treatment. What are some things that you think have kind of maybe changed in construction forever?
I think outside of the safety measures that we're taking on in place right now and that are going to be moving forward, I think that people that are office-based like myself are going to see that there really isn't a need to fly to go to a conference, or some meetings can be done through Zoom or through Teams like this. I think that's going to be a big change and adjustment for us. And as well, I think the working from home, I don't currently have kids yet, but I think, once people with families or people that are commuting far distances, I think we're able to see that a lot of our team members are able to work quite efficiently and productively from home or remotely from wherever they are, using technology like we're using to have this conversation right now.
Yeah, I know. And living in a city like Vancouver and not having to commute somewhere, and that's just such a huge advantage for I think, like, even attracting talent, and to give them the option, like, you don't have to drive, you don't have to maybe do these things, you can be at home and make a cup of coffee in your own kitchen. Totally. I think has been really, I know for me and the company I work for, I've really enjoyed it, and I feel like I've been just as productive, and that was kind of a revelation, I think, for a lot of other people.
I agree, and I think the other thing we're starting to see is that there's such a thing as Teams or Zoom burnout almost, because you have all this, right? You have all this extra time. You're like, oh, this is great, and then you jam pack your schedule, and before you know it, like being on one call after the other. I think that people need to remember that we need to still have those buffers, because when you think about even doing just internal meetings, like I'm working out of our RAM office right now. We've got the leadership team here because we haven't closed offices, so we're able to social distance. But just that motion of getting up and going to a boardroom and grabbing a glass of water or a coffee or something. But when you don't do that, when you're just plugged in and you're just talking for 8-10 hours straight, and you look at your clock and 5 hours have gone by, it feels like 5 minutes. It's easy to get to not have that separation and be able to get up and walk around and move and stuff like that, right?
Right. And just being available every second digitally, so someone can just send you a message and be like, "Hey, are you available? I know you are."
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
What are some key tools that you think the government and industry can use to assist things going forward?
I think, one of the things we're doing with the BCCR right now is we're putting out a point of view on infrastructure in BC and how that can look moving forward. So I think now is the time we've all been able to hit the reset button professionally and personally, being at home and having this extra time to reflect and take a look at the way we're doing things. I think that can transfer into the way that the government and government agencies are delivering projects and the way that they're doing things. So I think, the COVID situation, there is some positives to it in terms of it has forced us to take a look at, okay, how we're doing business, how we're delivering projects, what are priorities. I mean, one thing that I've looked at, and I work in infrastructure, so of course I'm going to say that it's super important, but imagine like we couldn't have this conversation if we didn't have reliable electric power, and we didn't have reliable internet and water and everything else working from home. So imagine not having those essential things that we take for advantage every day. It's really, I think, framed what's important in terms of what infrastructure we need to make sure is moving forward and try and prioritize based on that, right?
Yeah, I know a lot of stories I've written, they've talked about trade enabling infrastructure as being a high priority, things that are going to keep the economy going, and also get people, shovel-ready jobs. They're going to immediately get people, paychecks, get people working. Totally. So yeah, that's definitely a discussion that I think is happening for sure.
I think there's shovel ready and there's shovel worthy as well. I think we need to combine the two of those and make sure that we're getting both of those with the way that we're looking at what projects are going to go forward.
For sure. Why don't you tell me a bit about the COVID-19 cabinet? I know that's something that the Roundtable is involved in, and some of the work that you guys are doing there.
Definitely. So that started in March, and that involved the BC Business Council and the Vancouver Board of Trade. And so I got involved with that, representing the BCCR, and we've got on that cabinet, we've got probably 70 or 80 different representatives from all different areas of business in the Lower Mainland. So it's not just NBC, actually. It's not just the construction community, but it's all areas. So, one thing that was a real eye-opener for me in the beginning was seeing how closely tied all of our different industries are. Like, you wouldn't really think about the restaurant industry doing infrastructure construction and stuff like that, but we're all just one touch point away from each other in terms of what we do and how we can help each other out. And I've talked about before about how the construction industry has been able to step in and help with frontline workers with masks earlier in the COVID pandemic, and there's other ways that we can help each other out. So part of what we've been doing on this cabinet is having surveys that are going out to the business community, construction community included. I've been sure to share that through LinkedIn and through our website, and to get feedback from people in the business community, not only in construction, about how we can look at and how the government can come together and provide funding and provide stimulus packages and wage subsidies and everything else that are going to hit more than just a couple groups. So I think it's good to get everyone's got really come together and to have a voice for BC business, and that's what the cabinet has been about.
And what are you seeing from some of that data? Because I know some of it has been coming back. I know there's several kind of rounds of these surveys. Are you getting
3 so far?
It's 3. Yeah. Have you gotten any key takeaways from that, or is it still too early?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely there's all kinds of different metrics that they've taken with that, the data that they've got from the people that responded. And there was a lot of responses, which has been great. So that it's enabled people to get their voice out there. And I would encourage people to go to the BC Business Council website and take a look at the different metrics that they've been able to pull out of that data. Because if you're in construction, there's certain areas that may be of value to you, whereas if you're in tourism or hospitality, there's other areas that can be of value. So I would definitely encourage people to go to the BC Business Council website, and it's a great source of information depending on what you're looking for. And they've got a lot of different breakdowns in terms of the way that information is presented.
All right, Jesse. Well, I think that'll do it. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. And is there anything else you'd like to add, or maybe that you'd like to mention before we go?
Yeah, no, my pleasure, and thanks for having me on. I was just going to say, make sure to follow the BCCR on LinkedIn, and by all means, follow me on LinkedIn as well. Just Jesse Unke, my name. I try to post as much as I can about the BCCR and about some of the topics that you and I have talked about. And we've got the BC infrastructure point of view that's going to be published shortly as well. So that'll be published both through our website and through LinkedIn as well. There'll be links there.
Do you have a timeline for when that point of view might be coming out?
Yeah, we're targeting this week to have that out. So I'd be happy to share a link with you as well that you can share with your listeners and with your readers when that is published.
Yeah, and today is the 15th, so hopefully if you're listening to this, maybe it's out by now. But yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Always great to chat.
All right, and that's pretty much it. I mean,
all right.
That's pretty much what we do on the podcast. So I hope that was okay. I know we touched on a bunch of different things, so. Good.
No, that's great. I mean, like what I really want to do, and the reason why I reconnected with you guys is just because we're trying to get word out on the BCCR, word out about the COVID cabinet and everything else, and get people, make sure people are aware that they know what's out there and that they're able to participate if they want to. So.
Well, yeah, I hope this helps you out. So that's all I need. Thanks so much, Jesse.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello everyone, and this is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the DCN and JOC, joining you again today. This segment is the Awesome 8. The Awesome 8 is a post that we put up on this podcast's Instagram account. We do it weekly. For those of you who don't follow us or are interested in our Instagram account, it is called The Construction Record. It's all one word. That's all you can look for in the search bar on Instagram, and you'll find us. Please follow us, and we'll follow you back. So the Awesome 8. The Awesome 8 is a post that is a compilation of 8 of the more interesting posts we've come across during the week on Instagram that are related to construction. They could be interesting initiatives, interesting people, interesting projects, interesting technology. If it's something of interest that we happen to catch as we were scrolling along on our screens and liked, it's something that we've shared and compiled in the Awesome 8. And we figured we'd like to share that with you here on the podcast as well. It's just not an Instagram information sharing tool, because some of these initiatives might spark something of interest to you with your company, or might help your company, and you might want to find out more information. So in this week's Awesome 8, we looked at things that make construction great beyond just the bricks and mortar building. So basically the compilation of the 8 posts that we shared for the Awesome 8 had to do with initiatives that were undertaken or events that were happening in construction that we think help make this industry so great for anybody that's involved. So in particular, one of the posts was a series of posts that we saw come out from OAA, the Ontario Association of Architects. They recently had a member survey, and they've been sharing some of that member feedback from that survey online via Instagram. And we highlighted one of the posts in our Awesome 8, and this is what the post said. My call to action for OAA addresses how the profession can support and foster BIPOC and LGBTQIA and visible minorities in leadership positions in offices today. And the OAA post at the poster said, on the OAA chat, we're continuing to share some of the feedback we've received on how to make the OAA and the architecture profession a better, more diverse, equitable, and inclusive place. This has really been fascinating to see, seeing these posts, because they are laying things bare, issues bare, the OAA. and they deserve kudos for that. Because you hear some of that member feedback they're receiving. I know for a fact there have been associations in this industry before that have received that type of feedback as it concerns their own business practices or how they deal with members, and it's never seen the light of day. Meanwhile, OAA is letting the stuff be seen and actually encouraging more feedback. So kudos to them, and that's why we thought they were worthy to include in the Awesome 8 this week. As well, in the Awesome 8 this week, we had a post from Bird Construction, in which they displayed their support for Pride this month. And their post said as follows: at Bird, we're committed to fostering inclusivity and a diverse workplace where people are free to be their authentic selves. We're proud to celebrate Pride Month and the contributions of our LGBTQ2S and colleagues make to our company, industry, and our communities. Happy Pride. And as well this week, we had the International Women in Engineering Day, which was June 23rd. We saw a variety of posts on Instagram supporting this initiative. So we shared a post from ACEC Canada as concerned that special day, a post from Morris Hirschfeld as well as it concerns that day. And as well, there's an account called She Who Dares Wins. And I thought this was a pretty neat post because the post was, "This is me engineering pregnant over 2 years ago. And today I'm still at it and pregnant again. Forgot to take a picture today, so one will follow tomorrow." And it's really neat. You know what I mean? Here's this poster with her pregnant baby bump at a construction site. And I thought it was really neat that she shared that with the industry, and we thought we would share it as well. And as well, one of the other posts in our Awesome 8 this week was from Skills Canada, and it was in celebration and in recognition of the recently passed Father's Day. A lot of different companies and authorities and agencies and advocacy groups posted about Father's Day, wishing dads well, and we did the same. So with that, that is this week's Awesome 8. If you want to follow us on Instagram, once again, just type in The Construction Record, and you'll find our podcast Instagram account there. Please follow us. We'll follow you back. And who knows, maybe one week you'll be featured in the Awesome 8 as well. Thank you, everyone.